Letters from Belgian children to the United States during World War I.
Liège, Belgium, 27th May 1915. Generous benefactors, it is with great pleasure that I write to you on behalf of my fellow pupils to express our feelings of respectful gratitude.
At the outset of this frightful calamity that is striking us, we could only look ahead with terror to the consequences of this new German invasion.
The threat of
starvation was a particular concern.
Hey Beth, why are you hanging out with my favorite World War I airplane? The technology behind these planes was incredible. They were made out of fabric and wood.
You know, Marty, the Great War wasn't just about bombs and bullets. There was a human element, too. In fact, I'm reading thank you letters to the United States from school children in Belgium.
Why were they writing thank you letters?
Well, that's all part of the human story.
Oh, I'd love to hear more about this. Do you have some time?
We've got about 30 minutes.
This is STEM in 30.
Hi, I'm Beth.
And I'm Marty, and today we are coming to you live from a very special location. We are at the residence of the Belgian Ambassador in Washington, D.C.
And we're joined by Mrs. Waters, who is the wife of the Belgian Ambassador. Thank you so much for hosting us in your home today.
You're most welcome.
Would you tell us a little bit about this house? It's beautiful.
Yes, I think it is one of the most beautiful diplomatic mansions in Washington, D.C. The house was built in 1930. It is outside a perfect imitation of an 18th century mansion. It is therefore a wonderful example of what is called classical revival architecture. Inside it is decorated with 18th century style ornaments as well, but also with paintings by Belgian artists. Belgium has had diplomatic relations with the United States for almost 200 years. And in 1946, after we fought 2 world wars together, the Belgian government purchased this house as a symbol of our friendship and as a tool to develop even more this great partnership. As a consequence, many important people have been hosted here. A king, a queen of Belgium, our prime ministers, high-ranking US officials, Supreme Court justices, you name it, a lot of very important people. And like today, we have those wonderful children of the Cheney Elementary School of Washington as our special guests.
Now, there's also a furry resident that lives here, right?
Oh yes, we have a dog and his name is Chili. He is an Australian Shepherd. He is 6 years old. Chili belongs to a member of our staff. And he loves to keep and protect this house, and he's perfectly happy here.
And as you said, we are joined by Cheney Elementary School today. Thank you so much for being here with us. This school is part of the Embassy Adoption Program.
I want to remind everybody watching online that you can submit questions right now. We have an expert standing by ready to answer those, and some of them we will actually use on the show. You can submit those questions in a variety of different ways, including on our website, through Facebook, through Twitter, or even old-fashioned email.
Now, we know that the arts are just as important as science, technology, engineering, and math when we're talking about education. But today we are going to focus more so on artwork for our last program of the school season.
We're going to take a deep dive into the human consequences of World War I. We're going to start today with my trip back to Kansas City, Missouri, my hometown, and the National World War I Museum and Memorial. We're going to hear a story about a soldier that served in both the German and the American armies during the Great War. We've moved in front of a couple of uniforms that have a really cool story. Can you tell us about it?
Sure. You know, one of the things when you go to any museum, when you start looking at the things are a story. Somebody touched it, well, in this case, lived in these uniforms, and it was in fact the exact same fellow who was born in Denmark and was drafted into the German army. When his older brother died, he decided to leave Denmark, managed to make his way to the United States, was then drafted into the U.S. Army. So he served for 18 months overseas fighting for the U.S. military. All throughout this war, there are these amazing individual stories that are complex and talk of heroism and sometimes really mundane things, but it's so worth the while to slow down and just find out a bit more.
So this one guy wore both of these uniforms, first for the German army and then for the United States.
He sure did.
We've moved to the library where we are now joined by Belgian Ambassador Wouters. Ambassador, thank you so much for having us in your home today.
You're most welcome.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about what was happening in Belgium during the First World War?
Yes, the First World War, or the Great War as it's often called, for Belgium was a special experience, because what happened in August 1914 was that the German troops marched into Belgium and expected that Belgium would not resist, would not fight back. We had the misfortune of being on the route of Germany in the direction of France. The idea being, the German idea being that they would conquer France very fast. But the Belgian government decided to resist. The result is that we had a war 4 years until 1918, when it ended in November, and we were occupied, so it was really a very bloody war. And eventually, thanks to the participation in the war of very important allies like the United States, like the United Kingdom, Canada, and many others, we were liberated, and so that was the end of the occupation by the German army of the territory of Belgium.
Now, the United States and Belgium had a special relationship that involved lace making during the war. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
The lace making industry in Belgium was already relaunched by the very popular Queen Elizabeth before the First World War. Then, of course, this activity, this craft, became more intense during the war, because it was not only a means of survival. Up to 60,000 families were dependent on the production of lace, which eventually they sold to the American families and individual persons, and that's why so many lace ended up in the United States. But it was not just survival for them, an income, it was also a way to express resistance to the German army who was occupying the Belgian territory.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for joining us. Recently, we had a workshop where we made poppies from lace. Now, poppies are a symbol of World War I. Let's see how that workshop went.
We're at the Belgian Embassy, joined by the Chesapeake Region Lace Guild and Janney Elementary School. Thank you guys for joining us today.
You're welcome.
We've also got Karen Thompson, a volunteer at the National Museum of American History. Karen, thanks for talking with us.
My great pleasure.
We're going to be making some lace. What are they going to be doing?
Today we are making a poppy, which is the symbol for the fallen in World War I. And we are taking 10 bobbins, these little sticks, some thread and a pattern, and weaving the threads together to make a poppy.
Karen, I don't think I'm coordinated enough to do this.
Well, I think you are. Can you count to 4?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you know right from left?
Usually.
Okay. Or that way and that way. Okay. Then you can make lace.
Wow. Well, if I can make lace, you guys can make lace.
So it's 2 and 4 that go left.
What's your favorite part about it?
Just the part where it's more like, it's not like the things that I usually do where I'm like using all my body energy. This is like just using like my brain more than my body energy.
Oh, look at that. See, it's curling up.
What do you think about lace making?
It's really fun. It's not boring, but at the same time, it's kind of calm.
I thought it was a lot of fun. At first it was a little bit hard, but then once you got the routine, it was a little bit easier, and I really enjoyed it.
Well, I got to tell you, I'm super proud of this one. I didn't make it because I don't possess that ability, but I'm going to take it home and give it to my mom. You guys did a great job today. Nice work. Mom, if you got the letter I sent, go ahead and open it now. We are joined by Dr. Peter Jacob, Chief Curator at the National Air and Space Museum. Peter, we've got a great art gallery that just opened that really looks at the human impact of World War I. Can you tell us about it?
Yes, it's called Artist Soldiers, Artistic Expression During the First World War. And it looks at artwork created by artists who became soldiers and soldiers who became artists. Before World War I, most war art was heroic paintings done well after the battle, off the battlefield. But for the first time in World War I, we had true combat artists and artists who were capturing the experiences of the soldiers in the moment as it was happening.
So that was their specific job, to go to the battlefields and capture those images through painting?
Absolutely.
Wow. So who were those artists?
There were 8 professional artists that were commissioned as captains in the American Army, and they were sent over with the American troops in 1918, and they had free rein to cover what was going on not only on the battlefield but behind the lines, and just capture the general experience that all of the American soldiers were having.
Wow. Is there one painting that maybe kind of tells this story?
Well, there's more than 50 paintings in the exhibition. One that's very powerful, it's called On the Wire, and it shows 2 soldiers carrying a fallen comrade on a stretcher, but you really can see the reality of the war here, the fatigue and the loneliness that the soldiers are expressing, and it really gives a much more powerful impression of the war than earlier types of art that covered war.
Now, there were photographs, but the paintings seem to convey a lot more emotion.
Well, of course, photography existed at that time, and there's a lot of photographs which capture the war in detail, but through art, you really can see more of the emotional experience, the personal feelings that are expressed by the soldiers than you can in photography. So they work very well together.
Now, in this gallery, there are some photographs, but they're modern-day photographs taken of things that were done back then?
Yes. The World War I was known for trench warfare. That was what it was most known for. But next to the trenches were these underground spaces. They were stone quarries that had been used for castles and cathedrals for hundreds of years. And during the war, they were shelters. They were places where the soldiers took refuge during the battles. But remember, they're stone quarries, so the walls, the ceilings, the floor are all stone. And soldiers did carvings on these walls. Some of them were simple, just a name and a place, but others were quite elaborate. Even religious altars were carved in the stone, and soldiers would go there, pray before they went into the battle.
Wow, and the photography is absolutely amazing. If you get a chance to stop by the museum in downtown Washington, D.C., make sure you see the art gallery. And if you can't make it there, there's a great online component that you can check out as well. Now, let's move on to a few more of the letters that were written by Belgian school children during World War I.
The words of suffering Belgians.
Nous sommes bien jeunes pour comprendre parfaitement le sens des mots qui résonnent si souvent à nos oreilles. Ruins, bloody mourning, irreparable losses. Yet we have a fair idea of these miseries due to the sadness that is so tangible around us. The red eyes of mothers, the feeling that something is not quite right at home.
Un jour, nous vîmes s'envoler tout espoir d'être ravitaillés. Quand l'Amérique belle et bonne est venue nous promettre secours, il nous donnait du pain pour subsister jusqu'à la délivrance de la patrie.
In winter, we wore the warm clothes you sent us with great pride. We were given toys, beautiful bright red apples, candy sent to us by young American girls who had saved them especially for us.
Peter, you ready for some questions?
Sure.
All right, let's start with a video question.
I'm Alice, and I was wondering, what can we learn by looking at old pictures and letters?
Well, old pictures and letters are the stuff of history. Those are part of the records that we have that tell us what the story was like for people in the past. You know, there's a famous historian who said, the past is like a different country. They do things differently there. And that's what we learn when we look at old photographs, letters, other materials. It tells us what life was like in a different time, just like life in a different place.
Primary sources.
Absolutely.
All right. We've got a student correspondent in the audience. Do you guys have some questions?
Yes, we have one from Annie. How many advances did airplanes make between 1903 and 1914?
Well, World War I started in 1914, and it was just 10 years after the Wright brothers made the first airplane flights in 1903, late 1903. I always kind of joke that when World War I started, there were only 2 kinds of airplanes, ones that flew and ones that didn't. But by the end of the war, in 1918, there was a lot of advances in the technology, and were airplanes for special missions, fighter planes, bombers, reconnaissance airplanes. So the airplane really advanced a great deal in those 4 short years.
Okay, let's go to an online question next. When the soldiers took photos, did they develop the film themselves, or did they have to wait until they got back home?
Well, they didn't have to wait till they got back home, but it wasn't like your camera today where you take a photo and you can look at it instantly. They did have labs, photo labs in the field, so they were able to develop the film and make pictures in the field, but it did take a little while.
Okay. Luca, do we have another audience question?
Yeah, we have one from Nadia.
How many people could fit on the aircrafts?
Well, it depends on the type of airplane it was. As I mentioned, by the end of the war, you had all different types of airplanes for different purposes. So if you had a fighter plane, that would just be one person, like a modern combat plane. But a bomber plane might have several people on it. So it depended on what the purpose of the airplane was.
Okay. All right, Luca, do we have another audience question?
Yes, we have one from Mark. Did smaller armies like Serbia and Austria-Hungary have planes?
That's the thing, you know, it was World War I. It was the first World War. So many countries were involved, not just the great powers that we think of, like France, Britain, Germany, and the United States. On the German side, Austria-Hungary was the other major power, and they did have airplanes that they built. But some of the smaller countries used Austrian airplanes or German airplanes.
Okay. All right, let's go to an online question next. How far and long could the airplanes travel?
Well, again, at the beginning of the war, airplanes were very low performance, couldn't fly very far or very fast, but by the end of the war, they could fly great distances and stay in the air for hours at a time. So tremendous advances in the performance of the airplanes as well.
Awesome. All right, well, let's go back and look at a few more of those letters from Belgian school children to the United States written during World War I.
The words of suffering Belgians. Peut-être serez-vous étonnés de trouver sous la plume de jeunes enfants des mots si peu en rapport avec leur âge, souffrance et deuil. Oh, nous les comprenons, nous les sentons.
We are writing to you not as scholars, but as young schoolgirls with overflowing hearts, and who, in their simple language, will attempt to stutter some words of grateful affection. What we do know is that it's thanks to generous America that we still have bread on our table, and even candy.
I've got my friends from Janie's school here, and I've got a little challenge for you guys. I'm going to tell you a word, and I want you to give me one word back that you think of when you hear that word. You ready for this? All right, the word is artifact. What comes to mind when you think of the word artifact?
Expensive.
Expensive.
Special.
Special.
Old.
Old. Those are really interesting words, but those maybe don't capture it completely. Beth, what do you think?
Yes, Peter, now when you put together the Artist Soldiers exhibit, you didn't just put in paintings and drawings, you actually put in artifacts into the gallery as well. Why did you decide to do that?
Well, of course, artifacts are things people make, things people use. They're the stuff that we all live with. And objects that are from an earlier time help us understand the life and experiences that people had. For example, in the Artist Soldiers exhibit, we have a wheelchair, an actual wheelchair that was used in World War I. And that gives you a sense of the individual stories that were told. We tend to think of great historical events where millions of people were involved, but they're all made up by individuals and individual stories. So the wheelchair gives us that idea that, well, here's one person's story.
Now, the soldiers used stuff that they had around, like shell casings, to make art as well. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, we call that trench art because during the First World War, that really increased a lot, where soldiers in their spare time would use the equipment that they had and weapons and so forth and fashion works of art or decorative pieces out of that. They would make vases out of shell casings. One of my favorites that we have in the exhibition is a little dollhouse-sized table and cups that was made out of the casing's bullets, and the table is made out of the bottom of a large shell.
And probably that soldier never thought that his little dollhouse-sized table and cups would be in a museum.
Well, we collect things, and again, it tells us a little bit about the experience of people who lived in another time.
Now, our friends from the Janie School actually brought in some artifacts, and Marty, do you want to have us tell us a little bit about them?
Sure. Sophia, you brought an artifact in. What did you bring in? Hold it up here.
I brought in a bracelet that's made out of Dutch coins.
Now, Sophia, does this bracelet kind of tell your story?
Yes, so my great-grandfather helped this Dutch family in World War II. He helped them stay safe, and he gave them food. And after that, they gave him a present that they made out of their coins, and now it's a Dutch bracelet that they made. So
Wow, I'll bet that's pretty special to you and your family, isn't it?
very, very special.
That's cool. I think that shows that we are all a part of history and we have that story to tell. Beth?
Peter, how does something like a bracelet made of coins become an artifact?
Well, artifacts are things that we make, things that we use, things that we make, and they tell our story. Just like a couch or a table or a chair that we use today, if we save one from the past, it tells us a bit how people lived in the past when they maybe used different kind of artifacts, different kinds of objects.
And how does a museum decide what artifacts to collect?
Well, we want to make sure we have objects that support the stories that we tell. In this case, we're talking about World War I, and we're talking about how artists were involved in telling that story. So the objects that we have, the trench art objects, help tell that story.
Okay, and now let's go and take a look at some other primary sources, some more letters from Belgian school children.
Belgians express their gratitude.
Quelle est profonde la gratitude que nous éprouvons au souvenir de tant de bienfaits dont vous nous avez comblés en ces temps heureux.
Please accept our noble benefactors' heartfelt wishes for peace, prosperity, and endless independence.
For many months, you have helped us survive with tireless dedication. Without your generosity, the Belgians would have perhaps gone hungry. What a noble heart was shown by those who provide for our needs.
Peter, do you want to take some more questions?
Sure.
Let's start with a video question.
Hi, I'm Luis, and I was wondering how museums choose what they put on display.
Well, we pick things that tell the stories of people's lives in the past. We have things today that we would save that we may have a little bit different than people had in the past, but the old things tell us what their lives were like in an earlier time, and that's what we collect in the museum.
Let's have, Luca, do we have an audience question?
Yeah, we have one from Meredith.
How big were the airplanes?
Well, as I mentioned before, at the beginning of the war, kind of all airplanes were pretty similar, the ones that flew and ones that didn't. But by the end of the war, the technology had evolved so much that you had fighter planes, you had big bombers, you had reconnaissance planes. So some of the airplanes had wingspans of more than 100 feet and had multiple engines. So by the end of the war, the technology really changed a lot.
Let's take an online question. Could soldiers take photos from airplanes during World War I?
That's an interesting question because that was a very important activity. One of the activities that was important was reconnaissance or observation. You want to know what the other side is doing, and airplanes allowed you to do that. So cameras were mounted on airplanes, and we had aerial photography which showed where the troops were, showed where the trenches were, and you could analyze that and then decide where your attack was going to be. So aerial photography and aerial reconnaissance was really, really important in World War I.
Luca, do we have another audience question?
Yeah, we have one from Nina. Were there a lot of planes in the war?
Well, when the war began, most countries only had maybe a few dozen airplanes. It was a very small industry, but by the end of the war, the industry had grown tremendously, and there were thousands of airplanes built.
Do we have another audience question, Luca?
Yeah, we have one from Sophia.
Were there spies in World War I?
There were spies in every war. That's a common thing, all the way back to ancient times. The idea of trying to figure out what is the other side trying to do has always been an important part of fighting a war. So, yep, there's spies then, and there's spies today.
Let's take an online question. Did the planes have parachutes?
Parachutes were invented during World War I, but they really weren't used very much because they were bulky and heavy, and these small airplanes didn't have a lot of power, so most pilots just chose not to use the parachute because it was just too heavy and too bulky.
Okay, we have another online question. How were planes piloted during World War I?
Well, airplanes in World War I were flown just the way airplanes are today. The Wright brothers, of course, invented the airplane in 1903, just 10 years before the beginning of the First World War. And one of the things that's special about the Wright brothers airplane is every airplane flies the same way their airplane did. So old airplanes fly like new airplanes.
Okay, Luca, do we have another audience question?
Yeah, we have one from Olivia. How did America contribute to World War I?
Well, the First World War began in 1914, but the United States didn't get involved until 1917, and our troops didn't get there until early 1918. By 1918, all the sides on the war, the British, the Germans, the French, were exhausted. It was a long, debilitating war. So the fresh troops from the United States and our supplies that we were able to bring to the Allied side were the final push to help the United States and the Allies win.
Luca, do we have another audience question?
Yes, we have another one from...
Which side had more planes?
Well, the Allies, the British, the French, the Americans, had more planes in numbers. The Germans and the Austrians had fewer planes. Part of the reason for that was because the battle was flown mostly over the German lines, partly because the location of where the trenches were, but also the westerly winds would blow the planes over the German lines. So a lot of the battles took place over Germany, or over France actually, on the German side of the lines. And that meant that a lot of the British and French and American airplanes were shot down, so they needed more airplanes.
Okay. Peter, thank you for joining us today. That's
My
all the
pleasure.
time we have. Now, we want to remind you that we will be back in August, and we will be on the road for the Great American Eclipse.
Hi, I'm Marty, and this is Passenger Seat Science, where we do cool sciencey stuff in the car because we're riding around and we don't have anything better to do. Today I'm on a road trip with my buddy John. John, how's it going?
Not too good, Marty. The sun's in my eyes even though I have sunglasses on.
I am glad that's happening. Well, okay, John, I'm not glad it's happening, but there's some cool science stuff that we can do with it. Try this. Hold your hand up and block the sun, but make sure you can still see the road. Does that help?
Yeah.
John has just created an eclipse. An eclipse is any time that you block the light coming from a celestial body. Typically, that means the sun or the moon. His hand is casting a shadow across his face, just like an eclipse casts a shadow across the earth. Later this year, there is an eclipse passing across the entire United States. If you live in the United States, you should be able to see this eclipse.
Even me?
Even you, John. And if you're in the right location, you might see a total solar eclipse. To learn more about the eclipse, be sure to tune in to STEM in 30 on August 16th and again on August 21st as we come to you live from the path of totality. This has been Passenger Seat Science. Science you ought to know.
Of course, I want to thank Peter Jacob for being with us here today. I want to thank Charlotte Grant of the Belgian Embassy. Without her, we probably would not have had such a wonderful show today. And I also want to thank Ambassador and Mrs. Waters for inviting us into their beautiful home.
We leave you today with scenes from the National World War I Museum and Memorial in Kansas City, Missouri. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.